Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Literature Lovers Night Out. I'm Pamela Klinger-Horn, and I'm coming to you live from New York City tonight, where I'm visiting my sons and their families. So we are a little bit off kilter tonight, but I think we've got the tech down and we're ready to roll. Please let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat box. We'd love to see what cities and states we have represented and how many people are clicking in with us. I can see the numbers going up quite steadily here. Tonight, we are thrilled to be hosting four very prestigious authors. We have Barbara Shapiro joining us from Boston, where she has just returned. And you may know her, she writes under B.A. Shapiro. We have Denny S. Bryce tuning in from the beautiful southern city of Savannah this evening. John Searles is at his holiday home in Sag Harbor, but he normally resides in the city of New York. And Grant is joining us from Brooklyn, Grant Ginder. So we are ready to roll tonight. We have an exciting lineup and four fabulous new novels that I know you will be wanting to put into your summer reading bags, and lots of exciting stuff to hear about from our authors this evening. So let's see, we've got people tuning in from Texas and Iowa, and I'm assuming there are Minnesotans out there since it's the Valley Bookseller event. Valley Bookseller is in beautiful Stillwater, Minnesota, and I hope that sometime you will all have a chance to come out and visit the store. We have a wonderful team of booksellers who will be more than happy to help you find that perfect read, whether it's for yourself or for a gift. We have a beautiful children's section as well, and it's just a gorgeous city to walk along the river, have dinner, shop in the boutiques, and of course, come to the bookstore, the very best part of all. Here's our Minnesotans tuning in. We've got Lakeville, Chanhassen, White Bear Lake, Venice Heights, and my friend Renee Rosen from Chicago. Thanks for tuning in, Renee.
Hi, Renee.
Renee's been a frequent visitor to the Literature Lovers program with several of her novels. Well, let's get started. So we are going to go in alphabetical order this evening, which means that Grant Ginder is our first speaker. So I'm going to have Barbara, Denny, and John turn off their cameras and microphones for now. Thank you. And I am going to tell you, oops, I apparently don't know my alphabet. First.
I was going to let you do it. I was like, Pamela, I'm not ready.
I know, because I don't have my paper sitting out. And so if we go in alphabetical order, Bryce does come before Ginder. So yes, let's do that. All right, Grant, you can come back later.
Oh my goodness. But notice how accommodating we all were. It's like, that's fine. We'll do it that way.
Well, that's not alphabetical.
Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm just diving in. So
would you like to introduce you?
Go right ahead.
Well, since I wrote up this nice introduction for you.
Okay, go for it.
Denny S. Bryce is the award-winning author of historical fiction, including Wild Women and the Blues, and her brand new novel she's presenting this evening, In the Face of the Sun. She is a former professional dancer and public relations professional, and she's also a professor at the MFA program at Drexel University. She's been a book critic for NPR and a freelance writer whose work has been published in USA Today and Harper's Bazaar. She's a member of the Historical Novel Society, the Women's Fiction Writers, and Tall Poppy Writers. She's originally from Chicago, but she now makes her home in the beautiful city of Savannah. In the Face of the Sun takes place in the 1960s with a pregnant young woman and her brash and very bold aunt embarking upon a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles to confront an old mystery from 1920s African-American Hollywood. This is filled with fascinating details, and In the Face of the Sun is going to be an eye-opening read as well as an entertaining one. So let's all please put our hands together and give a great big literature lovers welcome to the wonderful Denny S. Bryce.
Oh, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here, and especially thrilled because this is my sophomore novel, which means my second novel, In the Face of the Sun. historical fiction, dual timeline, and it's a story that I discovered, if you will, in 2017 when I was in Los Angeles attending the LA Film Festival. I am a person who used to do a lot of traveling. I don't do as much traveling now that I'm not doing my marketing and PR and dancer gigs from my past, but one of the places I love to stay are in old hotels. So I happened to be in Culver City for the LA Film Festival and was staying at the Culver Hotel, which was built, I believe, in the 1920s, most definitely in the 1920s. But on their second level, they have a sort of a museum feel to the space. And so I was, just rifling through some information and fell upon some information about a hotel by the name of the Hotel Somerville, which opened in Los Angeles in 1928. I was fascinated by the information that I was reading, mainly because it was the first luxury hotel built for African Americans by African Americans and financed by African Americans. What also made it incredibly unique and important was that African Americans could not stay at any of the other hotels, especially the luxury hotels in Los Angeles in the 1920s and onward for a number of decades, frankly. But this hotel was there. And so I jumped in my rental and went to the corner of 41st Street and Central Avenue, and there it was, Hotel Somerville. Now, in 2017, it was a senior living facility, and over the years, it had also become the Dunbar Hotel, the site of some of the jazz scene in the 40s and 50s in Los Angeles. So it had a lot of history. So that was the initial inspiration for the story. And as with Wild Women in the Blues, I am a person who is fascinated, intrigued, and in love with the entertainment industry. In the Black entertainment or Black Hollywood of the 1920s, it was an interesting time because you also had the first millionaire Black actor, who was a man by the name of Lincoln Perry, also known as Stepin Fetchit. So I had these pieces of story that I was like, okay, so how can we elaborate on this and find out what else we can bring to this story besides this significant spot in time. So I remembered something from my youth. When I was a kid, my mother had a 1968 Mustang, and it might have been the 70s when she had the 68 Mustang, but it was a car we were not allowed to get in because this was her car, her special car, and it was all fancy and everything. So 1968 came to mind because of my dear mother, my late mother, and that time period, in contrast to what was going on historically in 1928 in terms of civil rights activism and the changes that were happening nationwide, it was a wonderful, from my perspective, contrast, as I said, but also interesting two time periods to compare. And as I often do with my stories, I really like to dive into family histories and multi-generational tales. And I was able to do that with my main character, Daisy Washington, who is a chambermaid in 1928, but in 1968, she is estranged from her sister and helping her niece escape an abusive husband during a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles along Route 66. So that's, there's also a mystery involved because the first line of the book, I can share it because why not? It is the first line of the book, and it's a prologue, Tuesday, June 12th, 1990, Los Angeles. The night Veronica Fontaine died, there was a blackbird in the sky with a red and yellow triangle on its breast. It squawked like a crow. No song in its throat, just a curse. a string of damnations blasting my eardrums. Okay, so I read the whole first paragraph, but there is a mystery as a part of the story. One of the things that I like to talk about or share when I'm talking about my writing journey most definitely has to do with where I started as a writer. I actually wrote fan fiction. And that was how I relaxed after a busy day of working in marketing and PR, was to write stories about a TV series called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I was a fan of Spike and Buffy, so those were the fanfics that I wrote. And from that experience, I met writers who suggested that I join the Romance Writers of America. So I spent time with RWA before I really fell hard for historical fiction. In fact, historical fiction and thrillers and suspense and fantasy were really the genres that I'd read predominantly prior to getting involved in fan fiction or involved in RWA. So it was a natural place for me to go. I also, as a former spokesperson for corporations and a journalist and all that sort of stuff, I love research. And that's definitely a very important part of the historical fiction writer's journey, is to avoid the rabbit hole, which means you get so immersed in your historical research that it's very difficult to come back. So you're lost in time. And sometimes that also means you're not necessarily finishing projects when they're due. So I love research. I love digging around. You find so many stories, and the opportunity to write those hidden stories about the African-American experience in history or the Black experience in history is something that I'm very excited about doing and working on. My next novel, I actually have two deadlines I'm facing. One is set in the 19th century, and that will be for William Morrow. It's called The Other Princess, and it's going to be my first biographical historical fiction about Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who was a West African young girl who was a princess in her community, who was gifted to Queen Victoria in 1850. So I'm writing her story. And then the other book that I'm working on is called The Trial of Mrs Reinlander, which is a story set in 1925 based on a true story, a case where an heir by the name of Kip Rhinelander wants to get an annulment from his wife because she did not tell him she was Negro. So I'm very excited about that story as well, because it really is a very powerful case about public opinion, about colorism, about society, and a lot of different things. And it was headline news in 1920s. So I think that I have shared some things about myself and about my books, because I only have two, but I'm working on others. So that's the exciting part of this writing journey for me. This is like my fifth career, but this is the one I'm going to stick with for a while, I guarantee you. So I'm going to say thank you. And if there are questions, I'll look at them later.
Thank you so much, Denny. Yes, audience members, please type your questions into the Q&A box if you have any. I'll be monitoring that as well as the chat box. So any and all of the authors will be happy to answer questions both during the show and at the very end when they all come back on. So In the Face of the Sun and Wild Women in the Blues are both paperback originals. We're so excited to have copies of both of them at Valley Bookseller. We also have signed book plates from Denny. So if your book club is looking for something wonderful, grab this user-friendly paperback, throw it in your reach bag, in your carry-on for the airplane when you're headed to the cabin this summer. It's finally getting warm in Minnesota, so people will be back in the cabin. Great place to catch up on your reading tonight. These are all our fabulous summer reading features, and you won't want to miss a single one. So questions for Denny are more than welcome, and we will get to all of them at the very end. Jenny, thank you. Oh, wait, I see a question popping up. Someone's having a hard time hearing me. Okay. That's good, but I will turn up the volume and hopefully that will work. I am not in my own home tonight and I'm not on my own computer, so there may be a few technical glitches, but thank you for bearing with us. And thank you very much, Denny. We will let you turn off your camera. And now it is indeed Grant Ginder's turn because G is the next letter in the alphabet. Oh, thank you all for all the punches here. Grant tonight is going to present his newest novel, Let's Not Do That Again. He is the author of the former books. Let's Not Do That Again is his new one. Honestly, We Meant Well was his most recent one. The People We Hate at the Wedding. Are these great titles or what? I think Grant nails the titles. Driver's Education, and This Is How It Starts. Grant's originally from California. He studied at the University of Pennsylvania and received his MFA from NYU, where he now teaches writing. And he lives in Brooklyn, and he has a highly entertaining border terrier named Frankie, who's absolutely adorable. And if he would like to make an appearance, he would be most welcome.
Entertaining is, Pamela, entertaining is one word to describe him. Yeah, I can think of some other ones too.
Yeah, I've seen those on Twitter. But tonight he's presenting Let's Not Do That Again, which is all about the lies we tell, the people we love, and the consequences that we could never have imagined. It's funny, it's timely, it's a cracking good romp of a novel, and you're going to be so glad you met Grant and his characters. You may have seen Grant recently on Good Morning America or one of the current popular magazines, because Let's Not Do That Again is getting all kinds of press, and it has been dazzling reviews everywhere. 2022 is a huge year for Grant because not only does he have this brand new novel, in August on the big screen, they are going to be presenting his book, People We Hate at the Wedding. And I, for one, cannot wait to watch the film. And I hope that Grant will share some details about that tonight. I met Grant back in 2016. I immediately wanted to adopt him, and I've been reading his work ever since. So let's all welcome Grant Ginder and hear about all of his fabulous and exciting things he's got going on in 2022. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, Pamela. It is so fun to be here. I feel like we've been talking about doing this for so long. And also I was so enthralled with Denny's talk. It made me actually want to go write like Buffy fan fiction. I was such a Buffy fan. So yeah, my new book is Let's Not Do That Again, as Pamela said. And to summarize it just very briefly, it follows the last few weeks, maybe the last month, of a woman named Nancy Harrison's run for Senate. Nancy is a New York Congresswoman. She's quite successful. She inherited the seat from her dead husband. She's held it for 24 years, and she was expected to be a shoo-in into the Senate. Things are not turning out quite as she expected. She gets thrown another curveball when 3 weeks from the election, a video emerges of her wayward daughter, who's a bit of an enfant terrible, in Paris, throwing a champagne bottle through the window of a very popular French bistro, which, as you can imagine, leads to some problems for Nancy's campaign. A video is taken of it. The video goes viral. It's a public relations mess for Nancy, and so she charges her son Nick, who used to work with her, but who is now a writing teacher at NYU, which, as Pamela mentioned, I'm also a writing teacher at NYU. She charges Nick with the task of going to retrieve her daughter Greta from Paris before she can cause any more damage to the campaign, and the plot spirals from there. And so to begin with, I thought I would just introduce the Harrisons a little bit before getting into the inspiration from the book and what I think the book is about, and my own experience writing it, and then my larger career, so to speak. So the Harrisons, as I mentioned, Nancy Harrison is a tough as nails New York City Congresswoman who is running for Senate. She's a complicated character. She is balancing what it means to be a good mother with what it means to be a good politician. Her son, Nick, is, as I said, a writing teacher at NYU. He worked for his mother for 10 years as sort of her fixer. As it says in the book, at the behest of his mother, he once made both Cuomo brothers cry. He, though he's gotten out now from under her thumb and is striking out on his own. And part of striking out on his own is, as I said, teaching at NYU. He has a PhD in English. He is also working on an original musical that is based on the early life of Joan Didion. I don't know if there are any Joan Didion fans in the audience. I hope there are. She's one of my absolute favorites. But the title of his musical is called Hello to All That, which is a play on Didion's seminal essay, Goodbye to All That, about leaving New York. And then there's Greta. Greta is the youngest. She's 25. She has distanced herself from her family and sort of abandoned them. And when the book opens, she's been living in Bushwick in Brooklyn for quite some time, and has essentially disassociated herself from her family's wealth and anything to do with her family, based on a secret that she knows, or she thinks she knows, that is revealed later on in the book. So a lot of people ask me what was the inspiration for this novel, because it's sort of all over the place. There's a lot going on in it. Obviously, it's very plot driven. And my answer to that is that I started writing it in 2018, when I started seeing, we were in the middle of the Trump administration. There was a lot going on. I was seeing our democracy, American democracy, which is something that I had always, I think, taken for granted very naively. I was seeing it threatened from left, right, and center. And I started asking myself in those moments, what would I do to protect this very sacred thing? How far would I bend my own morals and my own ethics in service of this greater good? And that's a question that the Harrisons are faced with towards the end of the book, and how they decide to answer that question is going to have repercussions for really the rest of their lives. So that was the inspiration for it. I also, that said, that's kind of like a heavy question, but I also really wanted to write something fun. I was, as I said, writing this during the second half of the Trump administration, and then right through 2020 and into 2021, when a lot of not fun things were happening, as I think we all know. And so to that end, writing this book became a sort of escape for me. I wanted to write something that was lively, that was fun, that was keeping readers on the edge of their seats, that was fast. And so to that end, it became this sort of escape. I also have a background in politics, which was fun to play upon. After I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, I moved to DC, where I had worked on the Hill briefly as an intern, and then I worked at an organization called the Center for American Progress, where I was the speechwriter for John Podesta, which was a super interesting job. I loved speechwriting. I will also say, though, that I was absolutely miserable at politics, like so bad at politics, and just like being in DC in general. I learned very quickly that DC was, or is, the sort of city that the currency that it trades in is kind of knowing things first and having access to information. And I was always, for whatever reason, the last one to know anything. And so I remember one instance, I was where I worked in this communications pod at the Center for American Progress. It was an open floor plan, and a pope had died, and we were waiting for, or a pope was about to die. And it hadn't happened yet, and everyone wanted to be kind of the first to know that the Pope had died. And suddenly, from someone's office down the hall, I heard a scream that was, "Pope's dead!" And everyone was like, "God damn it, I missed it. I wasn't the one to know it first." And I was like, wow, I am so bad at this, because I was like, like looking at Gawker or People magazine or something. But what I loved about speechwriting, and what I think has come to inform my fiction, is this idea that the best speeches are built upon stories and use narratives to persuade people, to make a point, to change a mind. And so learning how to craft those narratives within speeches, I think later on really informed my fiction. I later went to get my MFA at NYU, and I actually think that speechwriting taught me more about writing fiction than my MFA did, which sounds bad for the speeches that I was writing, but it's true. It taught me something about narrative that I think was really crucial. That said, I think that at its heart, Let's Not Do That Again, as much as it uses this political set piece, it is at its heart a novel about families. Most of my novels, certainly the last three, are really about families. Family dysfunction really interests me. So I always say that Let's Not Do That is about political dysfunction and family dysfunction. I'm very interested in the imperfect ways that we love one another and how we balance our own selfish desires with caring for the people that are close to us. I think that inevitably love disappoints us, or we disappoint the people that we love, but that doesn't absolve, or that doesn't excuse us from the duty to love one another. And so how that tension plays out is really interesting to me. As Pamela said, this is also a novel about secrets and the power that they have. The power that they have to manipulate, but also the power that they have to save people. Another thing that really interests me when it comes to family relationships and the relationships that we have with people that we love is this question of whether honesty is always the best policy. Or are there times when it makes more sense to not tell someone something in order to protect them? I think that that's a negotiation that we're making with each other or in ourselves, every day, more times than we can count. And again, that plays into this the decision that this family has to make at the end of the novel, the repercussions of which are going to be just absolutely huge. The novel, that said, even though it's about family and these questions about how we love each other imperfectly, it's a little bit different than my previous novels in that it plays with genre just a little bit more than both People We Hate at the Wedding and Honestly We Met Well. Let's Not Do That Again is it's a contemporary political novel, but it has a little bit of mystery to it. It has a little bit of thriller aspect, particularly in its last third. And that was really fun for me to explore. At the beginning of the pandemic, when I was still writing the first draft of this book, I was reading just like a ton of Agatha Christie novels. Like I had never really dug into Agatha Christie before, and I was just like plowing through them. And what I found was the pleasure that I was getting from those novels was different than the pleasure that I get from when I read, contemporary literary fiction. When I read contemporary literary fiction, I love seeing my world reflected back to me. But when I was reading Agatha Christie, what I found was I was getting so much pleasure from seeing inconsequential details suddenly become consequential. That was so fun for me to see all these puzzle pieces fall into place. And so I wanted to play with that a little bit. The notion of Chekhov's gun certainly plays into this novel. For people who haven't heard of it, Chekhov had this rule that if you had a rifle on the wall in the first chapter of a book, it better go off by chapters 2 or chapter 3. And so that plays very heavily, that idea plays very heavily into Let's Not Do That Again. There are Easter eggs, I like to say, that are planted early in the book that later on in the book have these like crazy outsized consequences, which was a lot of fun for me to craft a story like that. Aside from that, as Pamela said, one of my previous novels is currently being turned into a movie, The People We Hate at the Wedding, with it's going to star Allison Janney, Kristen Bell, and Ben Platt, along with an amazing supporting cast. They're just incredible. I had the opportunity to visit the set. They filmed the vast majority of it in and around London this past fall, and so I had the opportunity to go to London in October to visit the set, which was just an absolute blast. I'd never been on a movie set before, and the day that I went, it was a very early morning. Where I had to be at the set at 7 o'clock in the morning, and everyone else had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were filming 2 hours outside of London, and so they sent a car for me to my hotel to pick me up, which I don't think anyone had ever sent a car for me before, which was hilarious. And so but then when we got to the set, I was absolutely shocked by how many people were there. There was like 200 people or more to make this movie. And that I went around for the first hour just apologizing to people for having to the fact that they had to get up so early, which, you know, I was like apologizing to Alice and Janny. I was like, oh my God, you got to get up at 6 a.m. I'm so sorry. I was apologizing to the director, the producer, you know, the grip, the sound guy. And they were like, relax. Like, it's a job. You wrote the book. That's fine. Just relax. But it was a very, very fun experience, and I feel very lucky that they're going to do it. I think the date, Pamela said August. I think it's probably going to get pushed back a little bit. We're still waiting for the set release date, but it'll be on Amazon Prime, and the writers who adapted it are absolutely wonderful. The director, Claire Scanlon, is incredible. It's a great team behind the movie, and I think everyone's going to be really pleased with it. I think that's about it. But Pamela, thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute dream. I'm almost done with my Negroni.
That sounds great. Well, you are having an exciting year. Christina had a question, but I think you answered it during the course of your presentation. If she has a further question, I'll let her type it into the box. Sharon, however, is wondering about your titles. She'd love to know how you came up with them and if those were the original titles for your books, or is this something that you worked on with your publicist together and came up with?
So that's a good, Sharon, that is a great question. So it's interesting, you know, for my last two titles, I had them in mind before I wrote the books, particularly with People We Hate at the Wedding. There's kind of a funny story there, in that I had the title before I actually even knew what the book was going to be about, because after attending a wedding on Long Island, on the way back, way back into the city, a friend very drunkenly asked me who I hated at the wedding. And I had the good sense to write that down into the notes section on my phone, people we hated at the wedding. And then the next morning I saw it on my phone and I was like, I'm going to write that book. And here we are. So
I
thank Sauvignon Blanc for that. Honestly, We Meant Well it came very, very early in the process. That's a novel about regret and how we deal with regret throughout our lives and the various forms that regret takes. And so that felt like a good title for me. Let's Not Do That Again, though, actually came after I wrote the book. I was calling it something else up until I was editing the book. And my editor and I were in a conversation, and I said, I was like, you know, I imagine this family just being like, oh, let's not do that again. And my editor said, that's it. That's your title. And it was funny because we weren't even looking for a new title at that point. We were relatively sure on the title that we were going to call it, which I won't even say because it's actually like such a bad title for a book now in retrospect, but it came much later. And so it's always a little bit different. It's a little bit different. I have the title for my next novel already set. And I had that one kind of before I started writing it. I knew what it was going to be about though. What's that?
Did we get a teaser or is it a secret?
Sure, I gave a teaser. It's about a family again, this time in the 1990s in Laguna Beach, where I grew up, and it's told from the point of view of the son in that family, which is really funny because when I mentioned this book in a profile that I did with the LA Times, and my mother read the profile, and she immediately called me and she was like, is this book about me? And I had to convince her that it wasn't. And then a half an hour later, my father called and said, but it's really about her, right? And no, it's not. But it's called Beefcake.
Beefcake. Okay. Yeah. And is that 2024? We can expect.
Who knows, Pamela? Who knows? Right. We'll see how fast I can write it.
Thank you, Grant. We are going to see you again a little later in the program.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful. Thank you.
And our next author is John Searles.
Hi, Pamela. Great to hear Grant and Denny, and I look forward to hearing Barbara too. So nice.
Such a great group. Everyone's going to have to buy all 4 of the featured titles tonight because you just won't be able to pick. And I promise you, I've read them all and you are not going to be disappointed. I only put books on the program that I have read and enjoyed. And so these are ones that you can count on with my personal recommendation. John's here tonight to talk about his newest novel, Her Last Affair. John is the best-selling author of the novel Help for the Haunted, Strange But True, and Boy Still Missing. He has been a Time Magazine person to watch, and the New York Daily News named him a New Yorker to watch. His second novel, Strange But True, was praised as sinister and complex by the New York Times and Publishers Weekly. and was named Best Novel of the Year by Salon Magazine. Strange But True was also adapted for a film and released in theaters nationwide, and you can currently watch it on HBO Max and Amazon Prime. Help for the Haunted was named a Boston Globe Best Crime Novel of the Year, an Entertainment Weekly Top 10 Must List, and won the Library Association's Alex Award. It also brought John to Minnesota, where he hosted the Opus and Olives literary event for the St. Paul Public Library. Yes, that was where I met John, and I will let you out on a secret. John asked me to marry him that night. And if my husband doesn't let me get another puppy, I'm going to consider taking him up on the offer. John's newest novel is Her Last Affair. It was named a best new book by People magazine. If you've been at the hair salon, you probably saw it in there. And it's been praised by Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews. John is going to be appearing on the Today Show on June 1st. So tune in to hear him talk about Her Last Affair on TV. I know I'll be watching. And John has recently retired as the books editor. Sorry?
Retired makes you sound like I'm 80.
No, he retired to write full time, much to my delight. He was the book editor at Cosmopolitan magazine for 23 years. And now, to the joy of readers everywhere, he's going to be writing full time. In addition to his novels, he frequently writes personal and travel essays, book and restaurant reviews, and he's been published in the New York Times, Washington Post, and many other magazines and websites. He's joining us tonight from Sag Harbor. And John normally lives in New York with his very cute little dog, Ruby. Is Ruby with you?
Yes, I was trying to get her what Grant was finishing up, but then I thought, you tuned to me and I'm not here. I was running around.
Ruby and Frankie both can appear later on this evening, but I'm going to let you take it away. Give it up, John Searles.
Thank you, Pamela. And I do think we should, consider this whole, you're married, I'm gay. You're straight, but we can maybe make something work. I don't know. It's unconventional, but we'll work on it. Okay, I thought what I would do is tell people a little bit about how I became a writer, and then a little bit about my new book, which is right here and here, Her Last Affair, which is set at an old abandoned drive-in movie theater, hence that little tattered abandoned drive-in screen on my book. So I always want to be a writer, and since we're here in Sag Harbor, I actually have some show and tell, which is one of the first books I ever wrote. My mom used to have this book of wallpaper swatches when I was a kid, and I would pick out my favorite patterns, glue them to cardboard, bind them with tape, fill them with construction paper, and then write stories inside. As you could see, there's my first book, Stories and Stories and Stories by John Searles. But then I would try to sell them to my family for 25 cents a story. So I was both a writer and a publisher from an early age. Another thing to note about this is the title. We're talking about Grant's beautiful titles. Well, this one is called Over the Rainbow. This one's called In Sugar Plum Land. This one's called Behind the Rainbow. My parents were shocked that they had a gay son. I was trying to send them a message, clearly, with these books I was writing. Anyway, my dad was a cross-country truck driver growing up, and my parents announced when I was like about 10 that they were going to send me trucking with my father in the summers to, quote, make a man out of me. And I always joke and say they didn't get the results they wanted. But off I went with my father on these trips, and they were sort of dull a lot of the time because there's just driving and you're staring out the window and listening to the CB and my dad playing country music. So my dad very sweetly started buying for me in the truck stops, the mass market paperbacks. In the truck stops, he bought me Stephen King's The Shining. He bought me some John Irving books. And my mom had a huge Sidney Sheldon collection. And I would bring those on the road to read. So I would read Sidney Sheldon at the age of 10, 11, 12. And my dad would sleep in the bunk at night. And I would sleep in what my dad called the dog house. I don't know if that's the official name, but that's what he called it. It's just the kind of engine cover between the seats. And I would have a flashlight and I would read these books. And then oftentimes in the middle of the night, there'd be a knock on the door of the truck and I would look down and it would be these ladies who would say, "You want some company up there, big boy?" And I would be like, "Dad, there's some women at the door." And he'd say, "Just ignore them." And so I would look down like, "No, thanks. I'm 12 and I'm reading Sidney Sheldon." So Anyway, I always wanted to be a writer, reading those books, writing these books from a young age, but I didn't really know how. No one in my family had ever even gone to college. And then sadly, was kind of putting myself through a state school, and my younger sister passed away after her senior prom, very tragically and suddenly. And I know writers are not supposed to use cliches, but I always do when I talk about this turning point in my life, because I realized how short life is and how fragile it all is. And I just thought, I always want to be a writer, I'm going to figure it out. So I moved to New York. I was a waiter for 12 years. Maybe I waited on some of you watching, if you ever were on the East Coast. And I wrote books, and I got a rejection letter, which I have also. I have all this show and tell because I'm here in Sag Harbor. I sent a book I wrote, my first book, to a friend of a friend of a friend who worked at a publishing house. And she said, you don't need an agent, just send it to me directly. And so like a couple months went by, I got the book back with a very polite kind of rejection letter, but almost like a form letter. But then I pulled it out, and this little scrap of paper floated to the floor. And it was a note from an in-house reader that was mistakenly left inside with the manuscript that was not meant to be there. And it says, and I quote, I could barely make it to page 60, and I feel really badly for anyone who has to go through to page 400. So I took to my bed. I thought I'd never write again, but then I did eventually start writing again. And I wrote a book, Boy Still Missing, and I wrote Strange But True and Help for the Haunted. And along the way, I started, as a magazine editor at Cosmo, I started opening packages in the book department. I didn't know if I was going to like it. My mom said, give it a try for 2 weeks. And I ended up staying for 23 years, as you said, happily. And I also had many other jobs there. And it was a really fun job. And I learned a lot about books and publishing, and have worked with an office full of very smart, fun women. And I often write from different perspectives. This book, Her Last Affair, the narrator is a woman. She's in her 70s. She, when we meet her, she's in her 70s, but she, years ago when she was young, used to pedal her bike to this field where they showed movies up on the drive-in movie screen. And she would watch them for free, but she couldn't hear because she didn't have money to pay to get in. So she would kind of make up stories as she was watching. And then one night, the owner of the drive-in catches her doing this. And he says, I've been keeping track. You've been doing this for months, and you're going to work off the ticket price. So he puts her to work in the projection room, where she meets his son, who's running the projector, and they fall in love. And together they run this old drive-in for 50 years. But when we meet her at the opening of the book, her husband dies in a freak accident in the woods behind the drive-in a few nights before their 50th anniversary. And that's one of the central mysteries of the book. And I said before about writing from a woman's point of view. I once did an interview on the Today Show, and the host asked me, well, how do you feel about writing a point of view of a woman, of a young girl? It was Help for the Haunted, and the point of view was a young girl. And my answer was, isn't it obvious deep down I am a teenage girl? And my mother told me that's when she turned off the TV. But really, I don't know, I grew up in a house with, my dad was always on the road, was always with my mom and my sisters. Growing up, I was really bullied by other boys, all my friends were the girls. And then out of college, I worked in an office full of women. So I almost sometimes feel more comfortable. And all of my publicist, my editor, my marketing person, everyone's a woman. So I had a lot of fun writing this, but it's actually 3 separate storylines that all converge halfway through the book. And so part of the puzzle piece for the reader is figuring out how these stories come together. And there are a lot of twists and turns and surprises. And one thing I did that I thought was just kind of fun, because the storylines are so seemingly separate at first, I thought I need to give a sense of cohesion for the reader, like kind of a nod saying, trust me, these are all part of one story. And so I had this idea to start each chapter with a quote from a film that once played on the screen at the drive-in. And so the quotes act as clues to the mystery that's unfolding and hints at what's about to happen in the chapter. And some of the movies are like, quotes are from like Casablanca, classics like that, or Mildred Pierce. And then others are kind of more sinister fare, like The Shining or Psycho. And then others are kind of forgotten 80s movies not Forgotten by Me because I love them, but like Mannequin or Cannonball Run or things like that, or Overboard. And so that was really fun to do. So there's a real, if you love movies, if you've ever been in love, if you've ever been betrayed, and if you've ever been to a drive-in movie theater, I think there's all of those things will appeal to you as a reader. And if you like a book that's a real puzzle piece that you have to solve and figure out with lots of twists and turns, then I think the book is for you. And so that's a little bit about me. I didn't keep track of time. I don't know if I went over or under. I hope I went under because I always try to be respectful.
Just perfect. And you can
Okay, good.
nice praise in the chat box. And I have a question for you. Sharon's our question person tonight. She asks about your multiple plot lines, and she's wondering, did you write them as we read them, or did you write them separately and then weave them all together?
Thank you, Sharon, by the way, and thank you to the Valley Booksellers. I hear so many good things about you, so thank you too, and for everybody tuning in. I wrote them separately at first. So weirdly, there's 3 different storylines. As I said, they seem very disconnected at first, but then they ultimately collide halfway through. And so I wrote, there's a male point of view, sort of this eccentric character named Jeremy who lives in New York City. And these are all people dealing with the issue of lost love and longing for someone from their past. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of people were reconnecting with people from their past. And so Jeremy is a writer. He gets an assignment to go back to Providence, Rhode Island, where he fell in love with a woman years and years before, and she broke his heart. He overheard her say something so horrible about him, so heartbreaking, that he left town and never spoke to her again. And I just want to interrupt and tell a funny story. People say, did you ever overhear anyone saying something bad about you? And I have 2 kind of funny stories about that. One is we had a couple over for dinner once in New York City. My husband made, it was a snowy winter night. We had a fire in our fireplace. My husband made like lamb shank. It was a snowy night, it was a blizzard. They were leaving and one forgot their sweater. And Pamela, I said, oh, it's okay, I'll run it down the stairwell and I'll meet them in the lobby. And I run down the stairs and I'm just about to step in the lobby and I hear them get off the elevator and they say, they serve such heavy food and John eats so fast. But anyway, the other story I don't want to another crazy story about hearing, and often actually growing up gay, I would often hear people talking about me, speculating on my sexuality, but when I was too young to even know what I was. So that experience happens in the book to this guy. And then there's another woman, Linnell. I started writing her second. She lives in Florida. She's in a real, just kind of dull, boring marriage, and she's about to turn 50. Her daughter's away overseas at a music program, and she's just bored. And then one morning she gets a Facebook message from her very first boyfriend, first love, that says, I've never stopped thinking about you all these years. And she doesn't want to have an affair. Morally, she thinks it's wrong, but also it's such a source of excitement for her. And so she ends up engaging in that affair. And then the final point of view, which is weird that I wrote this last, is the woman who runs the drive-in. And so I wrote them separately and then kind of took everything apart and then figured out a way to put them together in a way that was fun, I hope fun, for the reader.
It was absolutely thrilling. And I have to confess, I never read ahead or look at the end first, but I did flip through and I had to read all the movie quotes first and then go back and read everything because they were just so intriguing to see how you were going to start each chapter and which films were going to be mentioned. And it was very interesting.
I should also say during the writing of this book, our apartment burned down in New York City at the hands of an arsonist. So it's a little chat. If anything will set you back, it's losing your home because an arsonist burns it down. I was kind of writing it in people's spare bedrooms and hotel rooms when we were able to come out of town to our house here. So it was just a kind of my escape really from a lot of heartbreak. And my father, sadly, who I used to go trucking with years ago, he died in a terrible motorcycle accident. So it was a time of a lot of heartache in my life, but my kind of solace was getting up quietly in the mornings and writing this book and working on these characters in this world. So it was it's a good thing about being a writer. And I think Denny and Grant and Barbara would agree. You have a place to escape to at times.
Well, I think readers are going to agree that it's a great summer escapism. Pick up a copy of Her Last Affair. Valley Booksellers has copies of Her Last Affair, Help for the Haunted, and signed book plates from John. So get a couple of those for yourself. Mother's Day, Father's Day is coming up. All these authors' books make great gifts, and we will be happy to gift wrap them for you. And you can either come in the store and pick them up, or we will ship them right to you. But we are going to head over to our fourth author now. Thank you so much, John. We will see you towards the end of the program again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, thank you everybody for asking questions and listening and hopefully laughing a little.
Thank you. And it's now time for the wonderful Barbara Shapiro, B.A. Shapiro. I'm sure many of you recognize her name from her New York Times best-selling novels. She is the award-winning author of 9 novels. Her brand new one is Metropolis. It does not come out till May 17th, but I talked her publicist into letting us have her early. So you can pre-order copies of Metropolis and either come into Valley Bookseller on May 17th and pick up your copy with a signed book plate, or we can send it right to you or to whoever you would like to send it to for a gift. Like I said, Mother's Day, Father's Day, all those great things. You'll know her from her work, The Collector's Apprentice, The Muralist, and The Art Forger, which won the New England Book Award for Fiction, and many other honors. Her books have been selected as community reads throughout the country and have been translated into 12 languages. Barbara holds a PhD in sociology and has directed research projects, worked as a systems analyst, and headed the Boston office of a software development firm. And she served as a professor teaching sociology at Tufts University and the creative writing in the program at Northeastern University. The first time I heard Barbara speak was at Hennepin County Library, and I said to myself when she was on stage, I bet this woman is a college professor. And I was correct. She absolutely knows how to command a room as well as crafting an absolutely riveting novel. In Metropolis, you're going to encounter 6 really unforgettable characters who all live in the warehouse known as Metropolis. They come from wildly different backgrounds, and Barbara weaves these interlocking narratives together to tell their stories. It takes on the myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps in America, and it makes for an absolutely riveting read, as do her other books. So prepare to be educated and entertained. Let's join me in welcoming Barbara Shapiro from her home in Boston.
Why, thank you. It's so great to see you and so great to be here. And I only wish it could have been in person, but we have to take what we can get. So yes, my new book is Metropolis, and I actually have the finished book sitting in a box next to me, but because I just got home today, I haven't even been able to open it up. But so let me tell you about the evolution of this kind of crazy book. I thought that, the most, and I'm sure that the other writers will agree, that basically the most common question that you get is, where do you get your ideas? And different people talked about where they got their ideas. But usually the answer is really hard, because a story, to me, absolutely never pops up in full force. It takes all of this time. And so, for example, Metropolis germinated for over 30 years and finally came together through the convergence of a novel, a documentary, a video, and a newspaper article. So who knew? My previous 3 novels, The Art Forger, The Collector's Apprentice, and The Muralist, were all historical art-themed stories. And they were told in multiple voices over multiple times, and were huge research books. And I too love research, but I was kind of done with it after 10 years. So I said, okay, I'm going to switch this up. This time I'm going to write a book that would take place in the present, none of that historical research. It would take place in Boston, where I live, rather than in Paris or Philadelphia or New York City, where I don't live. And it wouldn't be about art. But the most important thing is it would have one single plot line and one single protagonist. But things didn't really work out that way. So Metropolis is set in present-day Boston, but it's a compilation of 6 or 10 or 12 different plots, depending how you want to count them. It has 6 major viewpoint characters, as Pamela said, and it revolves around a mystery centered on street photography. So no single protagonist, no single story, has art. What can you do? I blame Vivian Maier, Colin McCann, The Race of Life, and an article about a self-storage facility in the Boston Globe. Or maybe I actually thank them. So the evolution of this was that, so like in 1913, I saw the documentary Finding Vivian Maier, and it's about this enigmatic 20th century street photographer who was this bizarre looking woman, and she took thousands of photos. She was a nanny, and she took thousands of photos that were never seen by anyone until after her death. And looking at these photographs, I was just blown away. You'd see the glimpse of a stranger going about, their normal life, but somehow she managed to get it to reveal who the person was, as well as an insight into the human condition, which is what we're all trying to do with our novels. Also, it was uncanny. There would be a streetscape that didn't have any people in it, and yet it had its own kind of a universal human truth. They were black and white, they were intense urban, and I knew then that I had to write a novel about street photography, but where and how to pull it off, and who knew? So I have a file that's very cleverly named Novel Ideas, which over the 25 years, no, it's even longer than that, that I have been writing, and more than that, that I've been thinking of writing, has gotten very, very fat, my novel idea file, because the actual ideas are the easy part. It's the, as I'm sure everybody else will agree, it's the execution that's the part. So I put in Vivian Maier into my novel ideas file, but I couldn't really get her out of my head. And in 2009, I read the novel, which I'm sure a lot of you have read, Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. And I was so taken by it, by the idea that there were these characters who didn't know each other and wouldn't have known each other. And yet, because of a particular fluke in time or place, which in his story was both, and these people are thrown together, and they never would have had anything in common in the ordinary course of their lives, and they would have met each other, but because of this event, they have, and chaos ensues. So again, the novel ideas file, and again, I didn't forget. But decades before all of this, when I was a graduate student studying sociology, I watched a video called The Race of Life. Then it was a big deal to get it into the classroom. Now you can watch it on YouTube. And this video, it's short, it demonstrates pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, in no uncertain terms, that the starting line of life is not the same for all of us, that your parents' socioeconomic level while you're growing up can put you at the front of the line, or it can leave you behind. So in this, a group of people line up to run a foot race to win $100 or whatever it is. But before they begin, each one has to respond to a series of statements. And if the answer to the statement is yes, they take 2 steps forward. If the answer to the statement is no, they stay where they are. So examples of these statements are, you had more than 20 books in your house. Your mother completed college. You never had to pay the bills. You never worried about your safety while walking through the neighborhood. And then at the end of 25 or so of these statements, the race begins. So I think you can see where this is going. It doesn't mean that a person at the front can't stumble, or a person at the back can't run the fastest. It's just that the starting line is not the same for each of us. A single condition that you had no control over, that has nothing to do with you or your skills or your intelligence, sets up where you begin your race of life. And that condition is to whom you were born. Something Americans are loath to admit. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all of that crap. So surprise, surprise, now I wanted to write a novel about social class in America, specifically the effect of your class at birth and how it affects your chances of success as defined by our present culture. Once again, novel ideas file, and once again, I didn't forget. So although all of these ideas were calling to me, none of them fit into my plan of the single storyline and the single narrator. So I pushed them all aside and started working on some other ideas, none of which really coalesced. And then one day, totally by accident, I stumbled on an article in the Boston Globe about a 100-year-old self-storage facility in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'd driven past it tons of time. It's like this big 5-story brick kind of monstrosity that looks sort of like a medieval castle, including turrets. And it's sitting across the street from MIT. And inside in this article, they had photos of door upon door of units filled with a motley crew of people and an even more motley collection of the possessions that they could not leave behind. And there it was, the perfect intersection. Exit the single storyline narrator, enter Metropolis. So now I had 6 characters who could not be more different from one another. And they're on completely different paths in life. Each has their own struggles and their own secrets. And yet here they are at Metropolis. And their stories start intermingling in unexpected ways. And so it's kind of, we're talking about genre, stuff, and it's kind of a psychological suspense. It's kind of a mystery. They're calling it a literary thriller. I don't know. But anyway, so it's all wrapped around a mysterious accident, if it was an accident. And because of this accident, it pulls them together and tears them apart. So these are my 6 characters because and they each have their own story and they're so told in their own voice and everything connects. And I have to use my very, very many multicolored file cards to get this thing to work. So first we have Zach Davidson, and he's like in his mid-30s, and he's very charismatic and very good looking, has a long line of ex-girlfriends who still are his friends. He's also an ex-drug dealer, and he owns Metropolis. And at the beginning, he owns Metropolis. Then the accident happens and he loses Metropolis. And his story is about trying to get it back. Then there's Rose Gentilini. She's like in her late 40s, and she's the breadwinner of her struggling family. And she works for Zach and manages Metropolis, which he doesn't take that much interest in. And on the side, she takes bribes from people who she allows to live there illegally. And part of the reason she's doing this is because she needs to keep her son out of jail. Then there's Jason Franklin, who's in his early 40s. He's a really good guy. I wish I knew him. He's a lawyer who fell from his powerful position at the big mucky muck firm in Boston because he did the wrong thing for the right reasons. And he's trying to get back on his feet from an office that is a self-storage unit. Serge Laurent, early 50s, mentally unstable, homeless, and a street photographer, inspired by Vivian Mayer, of course. And he lives at Metropolis and wanders around Boston taking pictures, thousands and thousands of pictures that he shows to no one. Then there's Liddy Haynes. She's in her mid-50s. She's the epitome of wealth and culture and beauty. And she trades the penthouse of the most luxurious high-rise in Boston for a self-storage unit where she hopes to be safe from her abusive husband. And finally, Marta Arbello / Mercedes Bustamante. She's in her late 30s. She is a lovely young woman from Venezuela working on her doctoral dissertation at a top university in Boston. But due to a series of clerical errors, she has now been deported because her visa was revoked, and she hides from ICE inside a self-storage unit. So these people are Black, they're white, they're brown, they're Christian, they're Jews, they're gay, they're straight, they're stable, they're unstable. Liddy and Marta grew up quite wealthy. Zach grew up in upper middle class suburbia, and Jason was in comfortable middle class. But Rose was a product of a very gritty working class childhood, and Serge was really, really poor. So some of them, when the book begins, have slipped down the ladder a little bit, and some have climbed it. But in the end, it's where they began that make the difference. So I think of Metropolis as kind of a romp through my beloved Boston, which is an archipelago of cultural and economic neighborhoods that each have their own distinct qualities, and each of the characters comes from a different one. So in the book, there are tons of secrets, and there's domestic turmoil, and there's career catastrophes, and there's wayward children, and mental illness, and financial ruin. But to lighten it up a bit, there is also, love and friendship that's found in, the most unexpected places. So the characters could not be more different from each other, which is what I wanted. They're on completely different paths in life. And yes, I did have to use many, many multicolored file cards to get these plots to work. But here they are at Metropolis, and their stories start intermingling in unexpected ways. And it's all wrapped up inside of what I hope is a suspenseful novel that pulls them together and tears them apart, including photographs. So I had such fun writing this, as I'm sure you can tell. And I hope readers will have fun reading it and come away with an appreciation of street photography, which which writing the book got me really into. Also an appreciation for the beauty of life's juxtapositions. And also the difficulties our current society creates for those born on the lower economic rungs. So I hope that you will buy it and you will enjoy it and you will tell all your friends about it. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Barbara. I certainly enjoyed it. I was just fascinated with your characters and the way you wove those stories together. As you know, I'm a great fan of your novel, The Art Forger, and we do have copies of that as well at Valley Bookseller. So I'm wondering if you have a quick elevator pitch you can throw out for that one.
For The Art Forger?
Yes.
Gee, Pamela, that was 5 books ago. Okay. It is a story based on the 1990 art heist at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, in which at the time was $500 million worth of paintings. It's probably close to, $1 billion now, were stolen, and it has never been solved. And a young woman who is down on her luck as an artist is approached to forge a painting that was stolen during that heist. And the painting is an Edgar Degas painting, and chaos ensues.
Okay, thank you. I hope my sound is better. I'm hearing again that people are having trouble hearing me. Sorry about that. I have pasted links to all the books in the chat box, and we're now going to invite all the authors to come back on screen. If you have any questions for them, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We will take them in order. And all the books can be found at the Valley Bookseller website. I put that up in there, so you can either copy and paste particular titles or go right to the website and find everything. So thank you all. Let's see, I see there is a question in the chat box. Let me see here. The attendee would like to know for all the authors. Let's start with number 1, and we will go with Denny first, since you appeared first. Who is your most memorable character in your currently published book, and why?
Okay.
Uh-huh.
In the Face of the Sun, I really like Daisy Washington in 1968. She's a 60-year-old woman with style, with a temper, with sensuality. She's a little gruff, she's a little rough, and she still has a lot going on a lot of different levels, and she's on a vengeance mission. So all of those things combined, I really enjoy an older character that is as energized and energetic as anybody else on the page.
Grant, how about you?
I think my favorite character is Greta, the woman who, the daughter who throws the champagne bottle through the window of the French bistro. She's a total mess. I tend to like writing characters that are super complicated and characters that some readers might deem as unlikable. I like exploring the complexities and the selfishness and motivations of characters, and Greta has a ton of complexity. She is actually, the book has 5 acts, and the second act is told entirely from her point of view. She's the only character that gets a first-person perspective. And so it was really fun and rewarding for me to embody her perspective while writing that section.
Thank you. John?
I would probably Skyla, the nurse who ran the drive-in for years. But I have to say, there's another character in the book. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I did something kind of weird or unusual, which is Skyla I realized when I was writing the book, she has to be telling the story to someone, and I was like, who could she be telling it to? And then she keeps mentioning her nephew, a nephew named John. And so I wrote myself into the book, and my editor said, is that you? And I said, is that weird? I wrote myself into the book. She's like, no, it kind of worked. So I love it. Before, I don't know. Is that like meta? I guess I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Very much.
Barbara, how about you?
Well, I gotta say, I love Serge. He is a very, very sad but talented, troubled person, and he just wants to know the world, but he can only do it through his camera that he looks down into. It's an old Rolleiflex camera, so that he can see the world and try to understand it without actually interacting with it. And he has a very kind soul, but nobody understands him, and he's incredibly lonely. And yet that is the source of his great talent. So again, it's like what Grant said, the complicated characters who maybe other people don't really unlikable. But what is this unlikable character?
I hate it.
I hate it. You know,
The
it's
whole, yeah.
really what if you wrote a likable character all the time, the book would be incredibly boring.
Oh, can you imagine? I also have a belief that people think that characters are unlikable because they see a little bit of themselves in the characters that they don't like and don't want to confront.
Yeah.
And so when someone tells me like, "Oh, that character was so unlikable," I'm like, "Let's talk about your mother." You know, like let's talk about let's unpack that. Why didn't you like that character? So,
Right? It's always back to mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Denny, I've got a quick question for you. Was there anything in your research about old Hollywood that you weren't able to include in the book, but was a really fascinating detail?
Well, there's one thing that I can't remember if it's in the book, but I loved it, and so it might be in there. Stephen Fetchit, or Lincoln Perry, as I mentioned, was an incredibly wealthy actor, first millionaire Black actor. He was also a very controversial performer because of his depiction. Oh, well, the words are going out the window. But the way he characterized the African-American male was very derogatory. And however, when Rudolph Valentino passed away, Lincoln Perry, AKA Stephen Fetchit, said, "I can't let a good cashmere suit go to waste." So he bought all of Valentino's clothes and wore them. And I thought that was just very wild.
yeah.
Wearing a dead man suit. But nonetheless, that's exactly the type of personality he was.
Okay, exciting. John, you mentioned you're going to be on Good Morning America in June, and that you're also going to be featuring, not Good Morning America?
Today Show.
What's that?
Today Show.
Today's Show. Sorry, my mistake.
No.
But you're going to be talking about summer reading?
Yeah, I'm talking about her last affair, and then I've, for many, many years, thankfully, it's been very nice to be able to go on the Today Show and talk about books I love. And so it's great because I grew up like hiding in the library and reading books and going on those trips with my dad, and so I love books, and so I love to be able to spread the word about new books. So I'll be talking about what books I'm really excited about coming out this summer.
Guitars.
Getting that sounding like a marketing person there. I've
already picked up some tips from you.
But I actually have a funny story once about going on the Today Show. We did this segment years ago about when iPods first came out, and you could really kind of download classic audiobooks, and it seemed like a new thing at the time. So we had all these classics like Great Expectations and Jane Eyre, and I was saying, and now you can download them onto this little gadget. I mean, this was like more than 15 years ago. And so at the end in the plaza, I would always give the books out to people in the crowd, waiting there. And so people get so excited for their free book, and I'm handing them out, and this guy's like, "Please, can I have it? Can I have it?" So I give him Great Expectations, and then he goes, "Will you autograph it?"
Yeah, I had that too. It's like, they didn't write it.
Oh, it's a little old too.
And so I didn't know what to write, so I wrote, "Best of luck, Chuck."
Good answer.
Yep.
And Grant, I'm going to let you tell something that is always so funny on Twitter. You talk about the Rate My Professor comments that you've received. I want you to tell us one of your favorites.
No, I did an event a few weeks ago in California, and before the person who was introducing me, while he was introducing me, Grant is the author, this movie is coming out, and then he started reading some like I don't know why, but started reading some of my Rate My Professor reviews, which was just like more. I haven't looked at those in like a while, like years, and so I was like, oh my god, like what if there is something terrible in there? My favorite review. Actually, it didn't come from Rate My Professor. It came from a student evaluation that said, I unfortunately cuss like a sailor, and sometimes that works its way into class. And this person, the student in their review said, he sometimes swears in an attempt to seem young. And I was like, I will find you and I will haunt you for saying that, like, in an attempt to seem young.
Oh,
So,
Elderly,
So
35 or something.
right.
I mean, it was like, oh my God.
why that gets to you so much, Grace?
It was so like an attempt, like it wasn't working, right? To seem young, he's not young. Like there was so much, like there was a certain degree that where I was like, this is really impressive, just like how hard they're burning me with this. But that I think has been my favorite thing that I've my favorite review that I've received from my teacher.
Yeah. Well, that tells me I'm never going to do this rating game with with the professor thing. No, I'll just refuse.
Yeah.
Oh,
Four of you for making this night just an absolute dream come true. It was wonderful. We're out of time here, but we have copies of all of these wonderful books at Valley Bookseller. You can go right to the website, www.valleybookseller.com, and find all of these authors. Yes, hold those books up. And we've got signed
I'm
books.
looking for books.
Don't forget, you're going to have Memorial
I
Day
got the big ones.
for the big Memorial Day.
Right, I have like.
You got big ones.
Father's Day, birthdays, get them for yourself, get them for friends. Just go shopping, support your local independent bookstore. Valley
Absolutely.
Bookseller will be very happy to help you, as I said, in the store, or mail them directly to you or to anyone you want to send a gift to. And we will make sure you get a signed book plate as well. Many, many thanks to Denny S. Bryce tonight, Grant Ginder, Barbara Shapiro, and John Searles. I can't thank you all enough for generously sharing your evening with us. And I hope that when COVID is but a distant memory, that we can host you live in Minnesota. This summer, we will be returning to live programming in Stillwater, June 15th and July 27th. You can go onto the website and get tickets for those programs and come meet a whole bunch of authors face to face, live and in person again, just like in the olden days. So thank you for making our last virtual event really wonderful. This program was recorded, and you will all receive a copy of the recording tomorrow once it's up and active on YouTube. And you can share it with your friends and family or watch it again because you enjoyed it so much. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank
Pamela.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Pamela.
Thanks.
Thank you.